It's remarkable how young you can do philosophy for children. So even with children who are 3 or 4 years old, you can start getting them to think about any question that they can have a discussion about and disagree about and start to become becauses, giving reasons, is the beginnings of philosophy. At the heart of philosophy for children is the idea of a community of inquiry. So that's where, rather than the teacher in sort of broadcast mode transmitting information to the children form a community who work together to try and come up with the most reasonable answers to really difficult questions. So there's two sides to that. There's the community side, which means that the children are being considerate, they're being good listeners, they are building on each other's ideas. But there's also the inquiry side. It's not just a nice chat, they are thinking deeply, they're holding each other accountable for having good reasons for what they say and for saying, well, hang on a minute, I don't agree with that because. So there's some intellectual rigour there, as well as it being a friendly environment in which people feel their ideas are going to be listened to with interest and respect. The role of the teacher in philosophy for children is very, very different to the routine classroom role. When we are teaching, we are the most important person in the room. We stand up tall at the centre, at the front of the classroom. We want all the children's eyes to be on us. When you're facilitating a philosophical discussion, your teacher power works against you because you want the children to be looking to one another to see if what they've said is any good, not looking to you for validation. So your role as facilitator in a philosophical discussion is to be quite humble, not to be the centre of attention and the star of the show, but to sit back, take notes, notice interesting things the children are saying that you can reflect back to them afterwards. Lucy disagreed with Harry, which of those do you agree with more? So it's about taking yourself out of the centre and being at the service of their thinking rather than putting your own thoughts into the discussion. A typical philosophy session might start with a quick warm-up, and it's nice if that can be connected to the theme. So if I was doing a session about friendship, I might have a warm-up question like, which would be a better friend, a gorilla or a giraffe? The children in pairs have a minute to argue about that, come up with their reasons, and then I'll give them a stimulus, something to get them thinking, but not to tell them what to think. Philosophy for children, when it's done regularly, impacts children in lots of different ways. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that it makes them more reasonable, helps them to be better at sorting out their disputes in the playground, makes them better listeners. There's also some statistical evidence from the Education Endowment Fund in the UK that regular philosophy helps to close the gap between the more disadvantaged learners and their more privileged pairs, and it boosts their literacy and numeracy scores. It also has an important impact on the teachers. It makes them talk less and leave more space for the children to talk. Because they become used to having conversations about larger and more important ideas. And they also start to think of themselves as people whose ideas matter. They become people who can see that different values can clash with each other, and they become more capable of talking about things where there's uncertainty, because they can talk about issues where they're not trying to get the answer the teacher is waiting for, they're having to dig in, and maybe things are left resolved at the end because these questions are too difficult to resolve in a single lesson. It gives them the kind of stamina that they need to approach these important issues. The very simplest way to start with philosophy for children is to find some questions where reasonable people can disagree that have a sort of yes or no answer. So you could have a question like, can it ever be wrong to forgive someone? Or was mathematics invented or discovered? Or is the hole in the tredelnik part of the tredelnik? And what you can then do is give the children a minute to talk about that in pairs and then make the thinking physical. As simple as saying, if you think the hole in the tredelnik is part of the tredelnik, stand over here. If you think it isn't, stand over there. And then you get the class split into two sides. If they're nice and evenly balanced, you might then get them to come back together to have those conversations in pairs, because then there's more conversation. Or you might have one pass it on conversation where somebody starts talking and then they choose someone from the other side to speak, they choose someone from the other side to speak. Meanwhile, you can step back, take a back seat and let them start to facilitate the discussion for themselves. When teachers start doing philosophy for children with their classes, they're often quite surprised by the children who become strong contributors. Sometimes it's children who don't normally speak in class, disadvantaged children, children with special educational needs. And I think what empowers those children to find their voice in philosophy for children is the feeling that they haven't got to match up with the answer that the teachers already got in their head. Some feedback that philosophy for children facilitators are particularly proud to hear from parents is, I don't know what you've done to my child, he won't stop asking questions. Because that's very much something that philosophy for children promotes. It's not so much about getting to the answers, it's about taking a lively interest in the bigger questions, and it can really enrich the conversation around the dinner table or in front of the telly.